welcome to episode 127 of the CRICKETher Weekly. We've been round and about at the 100 this week, and there's been some big developments in the sense that two teams now have officially qualified for the finals. So Southern Brave and Oval Invincibles are now both through to the finals. And the third team is still to be decided, isn't it? But Birmingham Phoenix are in the driver's seat, we might say, Sid.
Yeah, so Birmingham Phoenix have got 2 games left at the moment we're recording. We're recording on Sunday morning. They're playing again this afternoon, and then they've got 1 game left in the final round. If they win one of those 2 games, then they're definitely through. If they lose both those games, then there is definitely a chance that they could not get through. So if they lose both their games, they'll be level on 6 points with other teams, and one of those teams could pip them on net run rate. So you think Birmingham Phoenix are going to win one of those games, but you never know.
Oh, exciting. Okay. And the other thing that hasn't yet been decided, of course, is which team finishes top, which means they don't have to play in the eliminator, so they automatically go through to the final. Now, I think that Brave are top at the moment, but could still be overtaken. Is that right?
Yeah, so if Brave win their final game, then they're definitely directly through to the final for all the good it did them last year. You'll remember last year that they went directly through to the final, having won all their games, and then got punched in the mouth by Marizanne Kapp.
Not literally.
Almost literally. But yeah, if Brave slip up, then both of the other teams, Phoenix presumably and Invincibles, could potentially overtake them on net run rate and grab that place directly in the final.
Okay, so going to be an exciting few days.
Yeah. So we've seen those teams. We've seen the teams at the top do really well.
And
obviously,
where's it gone right for Brave? Do you think? Yeah.
It's been kind of actually a strange season. One of the interesting things is that we feel that Brave have done really well. They've been awesome, and I've seen a few things going Brave are even better than last year. But it's interesting if you look at their net run rate, it's actually not that spectacular. And they've had a couple of good wins, but they've also had a couple of really close wins. And stop me if this sounds familiar. It's the Charlotte Edwards side that look like they're going to lose a game and then they pull it out of the bag. So they're doing exactly the same thing that the Vipers did. Or have done consistently, and winning games that it looked like they were going to lose, and that is what creates the kind of space for other people to potentially, if Brave lose that last game, then the others could then potentially overtake them on net run rate, because Brave haven't actually been quite as overwhelming in some of those games as they have been in a couple of them. There's a couple of good wins as well. But overall, I mean, it's just down to the squad depth and things, isn't it? And it's the same with Invincibles, and the kind of a very sort of harmonious kind of a team environment,
culture,
if you like.
Yeah.
And that's perhaps the one place. I mean, Phoenix definitely look like the third place team, don't they? And perhaps that's the one place they're not quite as sort of consistent a team as the Invincibles and Brave. And what we're seeing is like that even in these short tournaments, where in theory you just bring people together for a few weeks and then you cast them to the wins again. But being a team does actually matter, and kind of the ultimate example of that is the Invincibles experience last year, where they were able to make it through to the final, and kind of that team culture they felt was really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's it's maybe where some of the teams who have fallen down a bit, who are kind of lingering at the bottom of the table, haven't had that cohesiveness perhaps so much. So if you look at a team like the Welsh Fire, for example, they kind of last year they had problems because they were meant to have Meg Lanning, weren't they? And COVID, so she didn't come, and so they had to kind of cast around at the last minute for overseas players. This year, I think they've gone for a reasonable kind of sort of clear out of their overseas and got some new overseas in. They've had difficulties though with those in terms of Rachel Haynes has been unwell, unfortunately, and has missed a couple of games, and Hayley Matthews has gone home now because of the stuff happening with the Women's Caribbean Premier League and the 60. Is that how I meant to say it?
I think so.
Okay. She's had to leave
both those
early.
things they couldn't really predict, could they? Because the Caribbean Premier League wasn't on the timetable, and obviously you can't predict that Rachel Haynes was going to be unwell, and that really didn't help. But are there other issues at the Fire, Raf?
Well, yeah. I mean, the ECB strategically chose, didn't they, to have a Welsh team in the 100, a Welsh Fire, and that I think has meant that perhaps that team is a less attractive option, or seen as a less attractive option for the England players to go and play for a team carrying a kind of a Welsh name. I mean, it's a bit silly, really, because Welsh players have to come and play for England if they want to represent an international cricket team. I suppose that's a kind of example of English hypocrisy going on there potentially. But yeah, so I think that's been difficult. But obviously, one of the things was. I mean, it's gonna sound anti-Australian, but obviously it was Matthew Mott who was the coach last year of the Welsh Fire, and because of Australia being England's arch rivals, there was also a feeling of, well, we don't necessarily want to go and play for a team that's being coached by Mott, and I think that it's naive to have expected that not to have an effect. And of course, he's not now coaching them this year because he's gone on to bigger and better things.
England's massively successful men's white ball team, I believe, have won all their games by devastating margins this year. Just correct me if I'm wrong.
Let's pass that over, Sid. So anyway, but as I've said before, as I've reflected before in terms of regarding actually the Sunrisers in regional cricket, as a team you quickly establish a reputation as being a good team or a not so good team, and it's very difficult to then overcome that, and then it's very difficult for you to then have your pick of players. And to some extent that does relate to the overseas player issue, because if you have a clear out of your overseas players, again, Spirit are another team who have done this. Last year they felt that Tryon and Dottin had underperformed, so they've got in a new set of overseas players this year. And so, but if you're successful in the first year, like Invincibles were, then you keep your overseas, you keep that sense of consistency, you know where you are, and you keep that sense of team unity. If you're having to clear out, then a lot of the established overseas players will have already kind of picked their team and will be settled at a team. And then so your choice is maybe a bit more limited, but also you then have to deal with that turnover, don't you? And as you're saying, even for a short tournament, that can matter. So I think that's been tricky.
Yeah, and Fire have been quite loyal to a sort of core of Welsh players, but ironically, who's been the best Welsh player in the 100, Raf?
Sophia Smale, hasn't she?
Yeah.
She's been absolutely brilliant for Invincibles, and been bowling in the power play, taking wickets, and yeah, there is an irony in that. She was kind of picked up at the last minute as an injury replacement, but she is actually Welsh, so really, is a kind of natural fit for the Welsh Fire, but they've missed out on her, and you can bet that Invincibles are going to be on the phone to her as soon as this year's competition ends, saying we're having you next year, and she's going to feel loyalty to them.
Yeah, absolutely, and she's been fantastic this year. Not just with the ball, she's been great in the field as well.
Yes.
She's really quite athletic. There was a catch she took in one of the matches last week where she needed to move about 20 yards, and she did it at an absolutely lightning pace. I've barely ever seen anybody move so fast. She's like a 100-meter sprinter out of the blocks, and she's been really generally very reliable in the field as well. So another great asset to the team in that sense. But what about Spirit, Raf?
Yeah.
Because that's another thing. I mean, Spirit have got definitely the best name in the competition. They're probably the second best kit. How could they fail? And yeah,
you think they've got the best name? That's interesting. That's a debate for another episode, perhaps.
I mean, Manchester Original's obviously got the best kit. I think that's widely accepted.
Okay.
Black is the new black.
So it doesn't. So you having the best kit doesn't necessarily correlate with success either. Anyway, okay. So Spirit, I actually, because we were at Lord's yesterday for Spirit v Invincibles, and we got to go and talk to Naomi Tatani at the end of the match, as in an interview. We didn't just go and grab her for a random chat. And I said, what do you think's gone wrong for Spirit? And she said that actually they felt that their schedule had been quite tricky. She didn't mention this, but they have been a little bit screwed over by this new thing of kind of the almost the missing seventh game this year, because of the Commonwealth Games, each team is not playing one of the others. And so Spirit have actually feel that they missed out on playing one of the weaker sides. So I think they haven't played originals. Whereas I think two of the top teams have ended up not having to play each other.
Phoenix and Brave.
Okay.
So
that does make a bit of a difference in a short competition.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
think.
And nobody. It's worth pointing out again that nobody at the ECB really wanted to do this.
No.
It was the least bad solution,
Absolutely.
given that the Commonwealth Games kind of was pushing into the hundreds territory, really. So given that. They had to do what they had to do, but it has been a bit unfortunate.
Yeah, and the other thing that Datani said about Spirit was that I think this was a result of wanting to have a Lord's test during the 100. So Spirit ended up having the start of the competition. They were away for their first 3 games, I think it was, and so they were on the road straight away for about 10 or 11 days. And then in that time they didn't manage to get over the line and just had kind of a tricky time right at the start of the tournament. And with it being so short, that really then makes a difference, and you don't have momentum in the way that they would have.
If you don't start off with momentum, there's no way of getting it back in a tournament where you play 6 games.
Yeah, so that was kind of an interesting reflection, I think. So I think that perhaps there's been Spirit have been a little bit unlucky there. The other thing that I think is a little bit of something that I don't massively like about this year's 100 is this new policy of having 4 overseas players. Now, obviously, in the case of the Invincibles, it's been the most controversial because they got Susie Bates in as their 4th overseas, and she's actually openly said, I wasn't expecting to play, really. I was just expecting to kind of train and then maybe play if somebody got ill or injured. But actually, she has played. I think she's played every game except the first one, so that's been a bit controversial because she's then effectively been captaining in the place of Danae van Niekerk, and so I think that's been a kind of controversial acting out of that policy. What do you make of it, Sid, as a policy?
I think you have to know how to use that kind of thing. So I think that Southern Brave have been pretty clear that they've got Molly Strano, and she's very, very clearly the extra part. She's the spare. She's the backup plan. And everybody knows that, and everyone's cool with that if you go into it with that attitude and that knowledge. And so that she knows she's not going to play unless there's an injury to somebody else, but she's happy to be there and she's happy to get paid and be part of it under those circumstances. I think the issue is if you wind up with sort of 4 superstars, as was kind of happened at the Invincibles, and you wind up forcing yourself into selection dilemmas, which ultimately are a little bit unhealthy. Well, it doesn't seem to have damaged the Invincibles too much, and they could still definitely yet go on to win the tournament. They're into that knockout stage. They're kind of 2 wins away at worst, so they could go on to win it. But it definitely has been an issue that it's created a little bit of friction, and we've somebody said, I can't remember who it was, that the very different captaincy styles between Susie and Danae, didn't they?
That was Maddie Villiers yesterday, who we also interviewed. She was very diplomatic. She said they're totally different captaincy styles, and Danae won it for us last year, and I really loved playing under her. Pause. And I love playing under Susie Bates, and I was like, damn, I thought she was going to say something interesting then, but no, she was obviously, well, good,
I'm sure she
good
does.
For Maddie, because that's the answer that you've got to give in those circumstances. But yes, she did say that they're quite different captains.
Yeah, so that's kind of an interesting thing, isn't it? But well, we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Now, moving on from the 100. But sort of relatedly, we have had some quite big news come through this week in relation to next year's Women's Ashes schedule.
This has been talked about on background for several weeks now. So we've kind of known bits of this for a while, but obviously Will McPherson in The Independent decided to hit the publish button.
Bit of a scoop there.
Yeah. So
the venues.
So what's the schedule?
The venues are basically the story is that most of the matches are being moved from the smaller grounds. With a kind of a capacity of maybe 3,000 or 4,000.
Are they small or are they just far away, Raf?
To the bigger grounds. Well, if you live in the north, they're all far away. So moving from those smaller grounds to the bigger grounds, such as Lords and the Oval and Trent Bridge, which have a capacity of kind of 20 or 25,000. So the actual list of venues are, so for the Test, that's going to be at Trent Bridge. There's going to be T20s at the Oval, at Lords and Edgbaston. Edgbaston recently hosted the Commonwealth Games. and there's going to be ODIs at the Ageas Bowl, but also at Taunton and Bristol, which are two of those smaller venues that we are a bit more familiar with, that women's internationals have been played at recently. But other than those two, the rest of them are all going to very big grounds.
So taking the T20s to the big cities. Well, we haven't been. When was the last time we think that a T20 was played in London, Raf? When was the last T20 international played in London?
Well, I haven't looked it up, but I think it was the 2009 T20 World Cup, when England women played the semi-final at the Oval and then the final at Lords, both of which were double headers.
So that's well over 10 years ago, and obviously T20s, is the game that they think they're going to be able to bring in the big crowds for. We haven't played in London for much over the past 10, 15 years, and the reason for that is that London has just two cricket grounds essentially. I mean, it's got lots of other cricket pitches, but only two proper grounds which can accommodate spectators, Lords and the Oval. There's no equivalent of like the North Sydney Oval in Sydney, which can accommodate a couple of thousand spectators, while not being one of these huge grounds. So if they want to take the game into London, they need to use one of these huge grounds, and they're going to give both of them a shot. And I think it's an exciting opportunity. London is by far the biggest city in this country. It's kind of it's dominant. It's about something like 20% of the population of the island live within the immediate diaspora of London. So there's every chance that they could get really good crowds for this, and I'm excited about those T20s, and I'm looking forward to them definitely.
Yeah, it's great to be ambitious, isn't it?
And
have this goal to kind of fill the bigger grounds. But I think
we're a bit concerned about
the test at Trent Bridge.
We are.
I think that just in terms of the recent crowds that we've had at women's tests, first of all. So last year, the India test at Bristol, obviously we were still just coming out of COVID, so that probably had an impact. But you're looking at crowds of a couple of hundred for each of those 4 days, and that was disappointing. We then had much better crowds at Taunton for the recent test against South Africa, and we kind of looked at that as a success. So I think for maybe 2 or 3 of the 4 days they had about 1,000 people in, and they also really encouraged some of the local school children to come along, which was great to see, and they were very vocal in the crowd and obviously had a great time. A really brilliant initiative, but it's still 1,000 people is 1,000 people. Trent Bridge capacity, again, I meant to look this up, but I forgot. I think Trent Bridge has a capacity of maybe 18 or 20,000. It's a big ground. It's a big old ground.
Yeah.
And the idea that we can get anything approaching that for a women's test is quite scary. And the reason that I'm concerned, I understand that you have to kind of balance ambition, but there's a couple of reasons, and one of the reasons is about the spectator experience, and so it does make a huge difference how you feel about women's cricket. Let's say you're going to a women's international for the first time. If you go to Trent Bridge and you're in a huge ground and you're one of a crowd of maybe like 3,000, let's say they do really well and they get like 3,000 or 4,000. It's still going to feel tiny.
Quite empty.
It's going to feel very empty, and you're not going to get the best impression. Whereas if you're part of a crowd of 3,000 at Taunton for a women's test, you're going to have a great time.
Yeah, or even a crowd of 1,000 at Taunton.
Yeah.
I mean, that was the kind of numbers they were getting at Taunton. But I mean, my concern is that while we have had some reasonable crowds in the Midlands at Leicester and Derby and things for white ball games, at the end of the day, Nottingham is not the huge diaspora that Birmingham or London is, and I'm just not convinced that there are enough people that are going to turn up. But prove me wrong, guys. If Nottingham go out and market the hell out of this, and of course they haven't got a men's Ashes test this year.
No,
so
that was the other thing that I was actually going to say, the other point I was going to make, and the reason that I'm slightly concerned is it does feel a little bit like this decision's been made for political ECB reasons. It's a kind of a consolation prize for Trent Bridge, who haven't been awarded a men's Ashes test, and therefore they've gone, okay, well, we'll give you a women's Ashes test instead. Now, Trent Bridge hopefully will kind of take the bit between their teeth and, as you say, market the hell out of it, and maybe we'll get good crowds. But to award a ground a test match on that basis, it's not being done on the basis of what's best for women's cricket in that respect. It's from what we have kind of heard and have seen, it's almost being done because, well, it's a consolation prize, and that's not how we want women's cricket to be treated. So that's the other concern. But I do think that the spectator experience on the day really matters if we want to get new people coming in, and more than that, we want them to come back again.
Yeah,
absolutely. We've got to, and this does relate to the 100 actually, because I think that the 100's been a great success in and of itself in terms of crowd numbers and getting people to see women's cricket for the first time. But I've been doing some research on the people who came to the 100 in the first year in my capacity at Bournemouth University, and some of the stuff that we've found is that, yes, you have got people coming along who have been to cricket before, and who are kind of existing fans. You have also got this other audience of new people who have never been to cricket before, have a great time, see women playing cricket for the first time, and that's brilliant. But there's a total failure to then translate that into them going to other women's matches, whether that be the Rachel Hayhoe Flint Trophy or the Charlotte Edwards Cup, or even England women's matches.
Yeah,
they don't take their excitement and good time that they've had at the 100 and then translate that into, I'll go and watch some other cricket.
Yeah, it feels like a risk that we're going to wind up with sort of like a Wimbledon situation with tennis. Now, tennis, we've got Wimbledon that happens for 2 weeks a year, and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people go to it, and then the other 50 weeks a year nobody pays any attention whatsoever to tennis in this country. And whenever there's professional tennis played, it's not quite two men and a dog, but not far off. But the thing is that Wimbledon can do that, and British tennis can do that, because Wimbledon is selling American TV rights, the world's biggest TV market, and that can sustain British tennis for the rest of the year. Can the 100 alone sustain British cricket for the rest of the year? It can't. That's just not realistic. So it's really important that the ECB is able to translate the crowds and the excitement of the 100 into those other formats and those other teams. And we haven't quite seen that yet. But it's a bit of a longer term project. And let's hold our fire until next year, and let's see what those crowds end up like next year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, I think that's definitely moving to these bigger grounds is done on the basis of, you would hope, the ECB going, okay, we've actually going to have a strategy for how we translate the crowds of the 100 into crowds for England women's matches. So you'd hope that that's kind of really their priority and something that they're really talking about and working out how to do. And I think the other thing is that there's a bit of a risk that the ECB further alienate some of the smaller counties who are already a bit fed up about the fact that they missed out on hosting rights for the 100. So your likes of Worcestershire and Essex, who have over the years been really brilliant for women's cricket because they have provided those grounds and they have had pretty good crowds for women's internationals, and actually having women's international staged at those grounds, they've really treated them like something that they really want to have, and they have marketed them well. England women have often had a sellout crowd at Chelmsford, for example, Essex's ground, and so that's been really great. And it's almost like a kind of, well, thanks for everything you've given women's cricket over the years, see you later. And that's quite difficult. And I appreciate that if we want to be ambitious, then at some point we are going to have to leave those grounds behind. But it feels a little bit like the ECB are kind of adding to those tensions that are brewing, those kind of tensions between the bigger counties and the smaller counties. And women's cricket, once again, as it has been in the 100, is going to be caught in the crossfire. And that's not a healthy situation to be in. So I am a little bit concerned about that. Anyway, we'll leave it there for now. Welcome any thoughts or feedback on anything we've said. As ever, drop them below the line. But thanks for tuning in. See you in a week's time. Bye.
Bye.